At approximately 10:30 p.m., Anastasia called Michael. The moment he heard her voice, he knew something was wrong. She sounded disoriented. She told him she was drunk. She said she didn't feel well. Then she mentioned meeting a group of men who offered to help her get home. That sentence changed everything. Michael told her to stay exactly where she was. He said he was coming immediately. Minutes later, Anastasia sent him her live GPS location. That location would become the heart of the entire case. Michael reached the coordinates by 10:35 p.m. The area was dark, quiet, empty. Anastasia wasn't there. He called her again and again. No answer. Then her phone went silent. Using tracking software, he followed the last signal. At 11:38 p.m., it led him to the side of a road. There lay her phone, powered off, left behind. People don't abandon their phones unless control has already been taken from them. Michael went to the police immediately. He explained everything. His girlfriend was missing. Her phone had been abandoned. She had been intoxicated, vulnerable, and last seen with strangers. The response was casual, almost dismissive. She's an adult, they said. She probably stayed with someone. Come back later. There was no urgency, no search, no crime scene, and in true crime, time is never neutral. When Michael walked out of the police station that night, he believed naively that returning later would be enough, that once officers had time, they would see the situation for what it was. A young woman alone, intoxicated, last seen with strangers, her phone deliberately powered off and abandoned. In most places, that combination would trigger immediate alarms. On Kos, it triggered something else entirely. Doubt directed not at the danger, but at Anastasia herself. From the very beginning, the disappearance was framed as voluntary. Officers asked questions that subtly redirected blame. Had she argued with her boyfriend? Did she drink often? Had she ever disappeared before? Each question carried the same implication that what had happened was a lifestyle choice, not an emergency. The language used in those early hours mattered more than anyone realized, because it shaped everything that followed. Instead of canvassing the area where the phone was found, no perimeter was secured. Instead of pulling CCTV footage from nearby businesses immediately, nothing was requested. Instead of attempting to identify the man on the scooter while memories were fresh, the trail was allowed to cool. The case file was marked as a likely deliberate absence. That single classification bought someone time. In true crime, time is currency. 40 hours is enough to wash blood from fabric, until only faint traces remain. Enough to dispose of weapons, clothing, or personal items in places that will never be searched. Enough to rehearse stories, compare versions, and decide which lies sound the most believable. Enough to buy a ticket, pack a bag, and leave a country before questions turn into accusations. While Michael searched roads and beaches alone, the island continued as if nothing had happened. Tourists drank late into the night. Music spilled from bars. Scooters passed the same streets Anastasia had vanished from just hours earlier. Life moved forward, indifferent to the fact that somewhere, a young woman was either terrified, injured, or already dead. Back in Poland, Anastasia's family was unraveling. Calls were made to embassies. Messages flooded social media. Her photo began circulating online, accompanied by pleas for information. The silence from Greek authorities became impossible to ignore, and as pressure mounted from outside the island, from journalists, from diplomats, from a government demanding answers, the tone finally began to shift. On the morning of June 16th, nearly 40 hours after Anastasia vanished, orders came from above the local station. The disappearance was no longer treated as a misunderstanding. It was now a liability. Special units were dispatched from Athens. Drones were prepared. Sniffer dogs were brought in. Divers were placed on standby. Resources that had supposedly been unavailable suddenly appeared. Investigators began where they should have started from the beginning. Anastasia's last confirmed movements. The small market footage was retrieved, and the moment it played on screen, the entire case snapped into focus. The shop employee recognized the man immediately. He didn't need time to think. He didn't hesitate. "He's a regular," he said. The CCTV footage showed Anastasia entering the market alone, moving calmly through the aisles. It showed her paying, and then it showed her leaving, no longer alone. Walking beside her was a man the island already knew. That man was Salahuddin Shihab, a Bangladeshi national who had lived on Kos for over a decade. Known locally, occasionally employed on farms, familiar to shop owners, recently attempting to get work at the same hotel where Anastasia was employed. Police would later confirm that he had been actively trying to integrate further into tourist-facing jobs, positions that provided both income and access. Access is a detail that would become impossible to ignore. Once his identity was confirmed, the response was immediate and aggressive, as if investigators were trying to outrun the damage already done. Officers went straight to his residence. He wasn't there. But absence was no longer interpreted as coincidence. What they discovered instead was a detail that reframed everything. Salah had just purchased tickets to Italy. Not for next week. Not for later. Immediately. On a tourist island, people leave all the time. But they don't leave suddenly, without explanation, right after being last seen with a missing woman whose phone was found abandoned. That kind of timing isn't travel, it's flight. Police located Salah in the center of Kos before he could reach the ferry. He was arrested on the spot. Officers noted visible scratches across his body. Fresh, linear, not the kind you get from farm work, not the kind you ignore. When questioned, Salah offered his first version of events. He claimed Anastasia came to his apartment willingly. He said she wanted to buy drugs. He said they had consensual sex. He said he dropped her off afterward. On the surface, the story was designed to explain everything without explaining anything. It framed Anastasia as reckless, intoxicated, and responsible for her own fate. It was a familiar narrative, and one that had already delayed her rescue. But this time, there was evidence. CCTV did not support his timeline. Phone data contradicted his movements. Witness statements placed Anastasia elsewhere during key moments. The story didn't bend, it broke, so Salah changed it. Then he changed it again, then again. 3 versions in rapid succession, each one slightly different, each one attempting to account for a new piece of evidence as it surfaced. People who tell the truth do not need multiple drafts. Lies, on the other hand, require constant revision. While Salah was being questioned, police searched his residence. What they found erased any remaining doubt about the nature of the crime. A yellow shirt stained with blood, 2 knives both bearing blood traces, blonde hair that would later match Anastasia's DNA, and perhaps most chilling of all, his digital footprint. On his phone, investigators found internet searches that were precise, procedural, and unmistakably deliberate. How to hide fingerprints, how long DNA stays on skin, how to clean blood, how to leave a country after a crime. These were not abstract curiosities, they were instructions, and they were searched after Anastasia vanished. This was not an accident, followed by panic. This was preparation followed by fear of consequences. But even with all of this, one crucial element was still missing: Anastasia herself. Volunteers began joining the search when official efforts stalled. Locals, Polish nationals, seasonal workers, people who refused to accept that waiting was the only option. They searched roads, fields, and paths that authorities had overlooked. They trusted their instincts, not assumptions. In the Alex marshland, something felt wrong. Decay has a presence. It doesn't announce itself loudly, but it lingers in the air. Under a solitary olive tree, volunteers noticed branches placed in a way that didn't look natural. Not fallen, arranged. Beneath them lay a black plastic bag, partially buried in mud. A sheet protruded from one end, then a foot, pink nail polish. It was Anastasia. The condition of her body told a story that no statement ever could. There were no signs of animal predation, something that would have been unavoidable if she had been left there for days. There were signs of restraint, evidence of a struggle. The skin beneath her fingernails did not belong to her, it belonged to Salah. The cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation. She had fought hard to her last breath. DNA tied her to his apartment. Blood tied him to the murder. Witness testimony placed her inside his room. A roommate would later admit seeing Anastasia intoxicated, seated, vulnerable, while Salah drank with her. Grass embedded in Salah's clothing matched the marshland where her body was found. Every path led back to him, but one question refused to fade. If police had acted immediately, if CCTV had been pulled that first night, if assumptions hadn't replaced urgency, would Anastasia still be alive? We will never know. When investigators returned to the marshland where Anastasia's body was found, one detail immediately unsettled them. It wasn't just that her body had been hidden, it was how it had been hidden. The placement was deliberate, calculated, and completely inconsistent with panic. Forensic specialists noted that Anastasia's body showed signs of decomposition, but not the kind expected from a body left exposed in an open marsh for days. There were no insect colonies in advanced stages, no evidence of scavenging by animals, no damage that would normally occur when a body is left unattended in such an environment. That absence told a story louder than any witness ever could. She had not been there the whole time. Someone had moved her. That realization reframed the entire crime. This was not a single moment of violence followed by chaos. This was a sequence, a process. The body had been kept elsewhere, hidden, stored, protected from discovery before being transported and placed under the olive tree only after the search intensified. That meant the killer didn't flee immediately. He stayed, he watched, he waited, and then he returned. The olive tree itself became a point of focus. It stood on slightly elevated ground, surrounded by reeds that obscured visibility from nearby paths and roads. Carrying a body there would have required physical strength, familiarity with the terrain, and time. This was not a random dumping spot stumbled upon in desperation. It was chosen. Placement, not disposal. Police theorized that Anastasia's body may have been kept in a vehicle, a storage space, or an abandoned structure before being moved. That theory aligned with another disturbing fact. The killer likely followed media coverage closely. As international attention grew and pressure mounted, the risk of discovery increased. Moving the body became necessary, not to hide the crime, but to control how it would be found. The marsh was not just concealment, it was staging. Medical examination of Salahuddin revealed multiple linear abrasions across his arms, torso and neck. These were not defensive wounds from an attacker. They were fingernail scratches. When matched against the skin found under Anastasia's nails, the conclusion was unavoidable. She fought with everything she had. This detail matters, because it destroys any suggestion of consent. It eliminates ambiguity, and it confirms that Anastasia did not quietly fade into the night. She resisted. Digital forensics added another layer of intent. Investigators recovered a series of internet searches on Salah's phone that painted a chilling timeline of thought. These searches weren't vague, they were instructional. How to remove fingerprints, how long DNA remains detectable, how to clean blood from fabric and surfaces, how to leave a country quickly after committing a crime. These searches occurred after Anastasia vanished. They revealed not fear, but planning, not confusion, but calculation. The mind of someone thinking several steps ahead, not someone reacting impulsively. This wasn't an accident that spiraled out of control. It was violence followed by an attempt at erasure. At first, Salah's roommate said nothing. He claimed he had gone to sleep early, that he noticed nothing unusual. Silence is common in cases like this, not because witnesses don't know anything, but because they are afraid of what knowledge might cost them. But pressure has a way of cracking even the most careful silence. Eventually, the roommate admitted seeing Anastasia inside the apartment that night. She was intoxicated, sitting, vulnerable. Salah was drinking with her. When questioned further, the roommate recalled something else, something he hadn't mentioned before. When Salah returned the next morning, his clothes were dirty. Grass was embedded in the fabric, the same type of grass found in the marshland. That detail mattered. Kos is an island built on the promise of safety, resorts, beaches, and postcard sunsets. But after Anastasia's body was discovered, something shifted. Residents locked their doors earlier. Workers began warning each other not to walk alone. Parents started checking in more frequently. Paradise fractured not dramatically, but quietly. Fear doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it spreads in whispers. By the time the trial began in December 2024, the evidence was overwhelming. CCTV footage placed Anastasia with Salah. DNA tied her to his apartment. Blood evidence linked him directly to the violence. Witness testimony corroborated her presence in his room. Digital searches revealed intent. Flight attempts revealed guilt. This was not circumstantial, it was cumulative. Salahuddin maintained his innocence throughout the proceedings. He repeated variations of his story, each one less credible than the last. But lies collapse under weight, and the weight here was crushing. The verdict was unanimous: life imprisonment, possibility of parole after 25 years. Justice, by definition, arrived. But justice does not rewind time. Back in Poland, Anastasia was laid to rest beside her grandmother. Her mother read a letter that silenced the church. "You wanted to return rich," she said, "but you were always our greatest treasure." Michael placed a photograph of them together on the coffin, a future reduced to memory, and still, one question refused to disappear. If police had acted within hours, if assumptions had not replaced urgency, if one intoxicated woman had been seen as a person, not a stereotype, would the ending have been different? We will never know. Long before Anastasia Rubinska's life was taken, something else failed her first. It wasn't technology. It wasn't a lack of evidence. It wasn't even a lack of resources. What failed her was something far more dangerous, because it is invisible and widely accepted. Assumption. From the moment Anastasia was reported missing, the narrative around her disappearance began to drift in a direction that made urgency optional. She was young, she was a seasonal worker, she had been drinking, she was on a tourist island. Those details, taken together, quietly rewrote her story before facts had a chance to speak. Instead of being treated as a woman in danger, she was treated as a woman making choices, and in true crime, that distinction can be fatal. The classification of her disappearance as likely voluntary did more than delay action. It shaped the mindset of everyone involved. Once a case is framed that way, every new detail is filtered through skepticism rather than concern. Evidence isn't hunted, it's waited for. Time isn't treated as critical, it's treated as flexible. And the missing person is no longer someone to be protected, but someone to be explained away. This is not unique to Anastasia's case, it is a pattern. When people disappear quietly without screams, without witnesses, without visible violence, their urgency is often measured against their perceived lifestyle. Drunk tourists disappear. Seasonal workers make impulsive decisions. Young women stay out all night. These ideas become convenient explanations that delay intervention until intervention no longer matters. In Anastasia's case, the police response did not reflect the risk she was actually in. It reflected the assumptions they were comfortable making. Had CCTV footage been pulled that first night, Salahuddin would have been identified while he was still on the island, before he had time to clean, plan, or flee. Had the area where the phone was found been secured immediately, trace evidence might have been preserved. Had witnesses been interviewed while memories were fresh, inconsistencies could have been exposed before stories hardened into rehearsed narratives. Instead, 40 hours passed, and those 40 hours were not empty. They were filled with action, just not by the people tasked with protecting her. They were filled with a killer making decisions. The delay also had a psychological cost. When police do not act decisively, it sends a message, not just to families but to perpetrators. It tells them that the disappearance is not being taken seriously, that they are not yet the focus, that time is still on their side. For someone capable of violence, that message is not reassuring. It is empowering. Salahuddin did not panic immediately. He planned, he researched, he purchased tickets, he attempted to leave. Those actions are not the behaviors of someone overwhelmed by fear. They are the behaviors of someone calculating risk, and the risk was low, until it wasn't. When international pressure finally forced authorities to act, the response was swift and effective. Evidence was found, suspects were identified, arrests were made. The tools had always been available. What had been missing was belief. Belief that Anastasia's disappearance mattered immediately. After the case concluded, Kos returned to normal on the surface. Tourists continued to arrive, hotels filled. The island's reputation as a safe destination remained largely intact. But beneath that surface, something had changed. Seasonal workers talked about Anastasia in hushed tones. Locals remembered the olive tree. Parents became more cautious with daughters who worked late shifts. Fear does not need headlines to survive. It lives quietly in altered routines. Anastasia's case also exposed a broader truth about how systems fail women who disappear without spectacle. If there is no obvious crime scene, no visible injury, no immediate suspect, urgency becomes optional. And when urgency becomes optional, justice becomes fragile. This was not a failure of law enforcement as individuals. It was a failure of framework, a system that relies too heavily on probability instead of possibility. A system that asks, is this likely, instead of what if we're wrong? Because when the cost of being wrong is a human life, delay is not neutral. It is consequential. Anastasia did everything people are told to do. She shared her location. She called her partner when she felt unsafe. She trusted that help would come if something went wrong. She believed, like many do, that systems exist to protect people in moments like hers. But systems are only as effective as the assumptions guiding them, and in this case, those assumptions bought a killer time. When the trial ended and the verdict was read, the courtroom felt quieter than anyone expected. Life imprisonment. No gasps, no cheers, no sense of victory. Because by the time justice arrives in cases like this, it never feels like justice. It feels like documentation, a confirmation of something everyone already knows but wishes they didn't have to accept. Salahuddin Shihab was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. The evidence was overwhelming, the verdict was inevitable, yet nothing about it restored what was lost. It only closed a chapter that should never have existed in the first place. Anastasia Rubinska was not saved by the system. She was explained by it after the fact. Her murder was not sudden in the way movies portray violence. It was not chaos. It was not madness. It was a slow narrowing of options, a tightening of vulnerability, and a series of moments where help was almost within reach but never arrived fast enough. That is what makes this case so unsettling. There was no dramatic abduction caught on camera, no scream that echoed through the night, no witness who intervened at the last second. Instead, there was normalcy. A cafe, a market, a scooter ride, a phone call asking for help, and then silence. Silence is often misunderstood in true crime. People think silence means peace, or absence, or uncertainty. In reality, silence is often the loudest confession of all. It is what remains when someone no longer has control, when choices are taken away, when fear replaces agency. Anastasia's silence was not chosen, it was imposed. When her body was returned to Poland, the journey she had dreamed of taking the world over ended in a coffin. She had left home believing she would come back stronger, more independent, with stories to tell and plans to build. Instead, her return became a funeral procession watched by a grieving family, who had done nothing wrong except trust that their daughter would be safe. At the graveside, her mother's words cut through the air with devastating clarity. "You wanted to return rich, but you were always our greatest treasure." That sentence holds more truth than any court ruling ever could. Because Anastasia's value was never in where she worked, what she wore, how much she drank, or why she went out alone. Her value was inherent, and that value did not disappear just because circumstances made her vulnerable. This case forces an uncomfortable question, one that goes far beyond Kos, far beyond Greece, far beyond Anastasia herself. Who do we rush to save, and who do we hesitate over? If Anastasia had been a child, alarms would have sounded instantly. If she had been visibly injured, the response would have been immediate. If she had disappeared from a respectable setting, urgency would not have been debated. But she was a young woman on a tourist island. She had been drinking. She worked seasonally, and so urgency became negotiable. That hesitation is where danger lives. Violence does not always announce itself with force. Sometimes it waits quietly for permission. Permission granted by delay, doubt, and disbelief. Sometimes the difference between life and death is not courage or intelligence, but how quickly someone else decides you matter. Anastasia mattered. She always did. Her story is not a cautionary tale about trust. It is not a lesson about nightlife or travel or strangers. It is a warning about complacency, about how easily normal moments can turn fatal when systems fail to act decisively. Because Anastasia did everything right. She checked in. She asked for help. She shared her location. And still, she was left waiting. Some crimes are solved because evidence speaks. Others are solved because silence becomes impossible to ignore. Anastasia's case is both. The evidence told the story of her final hours, but the silence, those 40 hours of inaction, told the deeper truth. That protection delayed is protection denied. That belief should never be conditional, and that no one should have to disappear loudly to be taken seriously. Anastasia Rubinska was a daughter, a sister, a partner, a woman with plans that extended far beyond one summer job on a Greek island. She did not become important because she died. She was important long before that. If there is anything to take from this story, it is not fear but awareness. Listen when someone says they don't feel safe. Act when someone goes missing. Treat silence as a signal, not an inconvenience. Because sometimes the loudest confession is not spoken by a killer in court, but by a system that waited too long to listen.